Like and subscribe. The man in the cell was naked, covered in paint, and waiting with a sharpened jar lid in his hand. When the prison officers opened the door, he smiled. For years, Britain had whispered his name like a warning. Not because he was a serial killer, not because he led a gang, but because one man, locked behind bars for nearly his entire adult life, had somehow become the most violent prisoner in the country. His name was Charles Bronson. And this is the true story of how a small-time armed robber transformed himself into a living nightmare inside Britain's prisons. Before the headlines, before the riots and rooftop protests, Bronson was just Michael Gordon Peterson, born in Luton, England in 1952. Friends described him as energetic, funny, even charming. He loved football, boxing, attention, but beneath the surface, something darker simmered. In 1974, at 22 years old, Peterson walked into a post office carrying a sawn-off shotgun. He stole 26 pounds. That was it, 26 pounds. For that armed robbery, he received 7 years in prison. Most men would serve their sentence and disappear back into society. Bronson never came back out the same. Prison changed him, or perhaps revealed who he already was. Inside, he discovered violence gave him power, respect, fear. He began attacking inmates and prison guards with explosive unpredictability. Fists, chairs, boiling water, whatever he could use. And he loved the reaction. He later admitted that causing chaos made him feel alive. During one early stint in prison, Peterson became obsessed with Charles Bronson, the hard-faced Hollywood actor famous for vigilante roles. Peterson reinvented himself, taking the actor's name as his own. Now, he wasn't Michael Peterson anymore. He was Charles Bronson, and the legend was beginning. By the 1980s, prisons across Britain knew exactly who he was. Bronson would attack officers without warning, sometimes over tiny disputes, sometimes for no reason at all. He took hostages repeatedly, prison teachers, doctors, librarians. In one siege, he covered himself in butter so guards couldn't grab him. In another, he stripped naked and fought entire prison extraction teams alone. The violence became theatrical, terrifying, almost unbelievable. But every story was documented in incident reports scattered across Britain's prison system. At one psychiatric hospital, Bronson held a teacher hostage for nearly 2 days. He tied a makeshift noose around the man's neck and demanded an inflatable doll, a helicopter, and a cup of tea. The bizarre demands made headlines. But behind the absurdity was something genuinely dangerous. Officers never knew when Bronson would explode. Some believed he enjoyed the fame too much to stop. Others believed prison itself had broken his mind beyond repair. His reputation grew so large that he became a myth inside British jails. New inmates whispered stories about him. Guards dreaded being assigned near him. Even hardened criminals avoided provoking him. Bronson trained obsessively in his cell, doing thousands of press-ups daily. He turned his body into a weapon. Bare-knuckle boxing became one of his obsessions, and he claimed he could defeat multiple men at once. Whether true or exaggerated, nobody wanted to test it. The British prison system responded the only way it knew how: isolation, years alone, concrete walls, steel doors, minimal human contact. But isolation didn't calm Bronson. It made him stranger, more unpredictable. He began painting, writing poetry, creating bizarre artwork that sometimes sold to collectors fascinated by his notoriety. In interviews and letters, he shifted between charming humor and frightening aggression within seconds. One moment, he sounded intelligent and reflective. The next, deeply unstable. And Britain couldn't stop watching. In 1998 came one of the incidents that cemented his infamy forever. At HM Prison Belmarsh, Bronson took prison art teacher Phil Danielson hostage. For nearly 2 days, the standoff spiraled into chaos. Bronson handcuffed the teacher, marched him around the prison, and covered the walls with drawings and threats. Armed officers waited outside. Negotiators tried calming him down. Nobody knew how it would end. When the siege was finally over, Bronson received a life sentence. Not for murder, for kidnapping. That sentence effectively buried him inside Britain's prison system forever. Yet strangely, public fascination only intensified. In 2008, actor Tom Hardy portrayed Bronson in the film Bronson. Hardy gained massive weight and spent time speaking with the real Bronson to prepare for the role. The movie shocked audiences, not because Bronson was presented as a monster alone, but because he was charismatic, funny, even likable at times. That contradiction disturbed people most. How could someone so violent also seem so human? The truth is, Bronson became something far larger than an ordinary criminal. He became a symbol of everything broken inside the prison system. A man originally jailed over a robbery involving 26 pounds spent decade after decade becoming more violent behind bars. Critics argued the system created the monster it later struggled to contain. Others fiercely disagreed. They pointed to the injured guards, the terrified hostages, the repeated assaults. Bronson always had choices, and again, he chose violence. Even in later years, long after middle age, incidents continued. Attacks, threats, confrontations. Psychiatric evaluations painted a complicated picture of personality disorders, extreme aggression, and institutionalization. Prison had become the only world he truly understood. But perhaps the strangest part of Charles Bronson's story is this. He never killed anyone. Despite the chaos, the riots, the hostage situations, and the hundreds of violent incidents linked to his name, there are no confirmed murders attached to him. And yet few prisoners in British history inspired more fear. Because violence isn't measured only in body counts. Sometimes it's measured in tension, in unpredictability, in the terror of not knowing when the explosion is coming. For nearly 50 years, prison officers across Britain lived with that tension every time Charles Bronson was nearby. A man serving time for stealing 26 pounds became one of the most infamous prisoners alive. And somewhere behind another steel door, another guard eventually approached his cell, keys rattling in trembling hands. Never fully certain what waited on the other side.